One thing we can all agree on is power rankings. Oh, right. No, we never agree on power rankings. And I haven't done a power rankings video since April. And early April, right before the playoffs started. So during the playoffs, I didn't do any. I didn't do any before the draft. I had intended to, but I thought, yeah, I've had a board ready to go for weeks. And I've just stood here, and it's very often been right where my desk is here, and I've looked down at it, and I'm like, oh, those power rankings, that's interesting. And then signings happen and trades happen, and I move the power rankings around. And then sometimes I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, I'm going to move that team down, move that team up. And so, not scientific, but enjoying the moving the power rankings around. Now, when I do power rankings during the summer, obviously there's going to be some prejudice to the season we just finished. So teams that finished out of the playoffs, it is hard to project them jumping into the playoffs. Even though in any given season, 5, 6, maybe 8 teams that missed the playoffs the year before will make it the year after. It is trying to predict which teams. This year, for instance, you had Carolina and the Islanders stand out as teams that had big surprise seasons, and then do they follow that up with another? Would it be a surprise season if they stayed in the playoffs? I would say no on both counts, but I can understand why people would say it would be a surprise to see the Islanders or the Hurricanes in the playoffs in 2020, because that's how the whole opinion thing works. So that being said, at number 31, starting things off, you knew Ottawa was 31, didn't you? Now, I like some of the additions they've made, but their desperation to get to the cap floor tells me this is not the year they get better. They're saying all the right things publicly about, oh yeah, no, we believe in these guys. You're going to love these guys. This is going to be great. We're improving. Things are going to get better. But they're not. It's basically, I'm not going to say it's completely a smokescreen, because I think Pierre Dorian believes the things he's saying. But this roster, there's a lot of youth. And then you look at net, and you've got Anderson and Nilsson. And I'm not convinced that Anderson can go a full 82 game schedule without getting hurt at this point. And Nilsson, I love the guy, but he does tend to be kind of inconsistent, and he can go through some really rough stretches. He had a nice run with Ottawa after they acquired him from Vancouver, and they renewed him. But I do have some concerns with Ottawa's goaltending behind an inexperienced and kind of patchwork team in front of them. Not just blue line, but the team in general. So it's going to be an interesting year for them. Number 30. You got to score in this league. Scoring is up. Scoring is up. And I got a funny feeling that this year that we've got coming, 2019-2020, I think scoring is going to go up again. Look at all the dynamic rookies coming in. A lot of the old guard that's being squeezed out. And the LA Kings, well, they showed last year that they were an older team, and they couldn't score. You can be older, you can be a team that has trouble scoring, but if you're both, that's not great. Now, there are some good young kids that are potentially able to help. I like Iafallo a lot, but do I think Iafallo is going to score 65, 70 points this year? No. I have a hard time projecting that Kovalchuk would have a bounce back year. I think they've wanted to move on from that contract. Dustin Brown, Ante Kopitar are getting older. And I wonder, as all of this is going on, does it hit Drew Doughty at all? Like, does Drew Doughty look at how this season worked and look ahead and say, maybe I made a mistake here? Or does he just say, you know what, I'm a king for my career, and I'm willing to help however I can? The most interesting thing is Cal Peterson showed last year he's probably ready for NHL action, and they've still got 3 goaltenders. They've still got Quick and Campbell ahead of them. So I would hate to see Peterson have to spend another year in the American League, because he's good enough to play in the NHL. Number 29, Edmonton. Oilers fans knew they were coming up. And it's a matter of, Chason had a career year. I think it was, 24 goals. I don't think he does that again. I think it's kind of like Ty Ratty was the year before, where he had that really nice little run, and then it was just over. And there's no shame in that. But at the same time, they really needed to improve their wings, and they did not have the cap space to do so. And then you get into that other conversation, too, about whether or not free agents want to go to Edmonton, or if they view it as a dysfunctional situation. And with 31 different teams to choose from, they say, that's not on my list. So that becomes a problem. Part of what's kept Edmonton down is that during the era where they're drafting Hall first overall and they draft Nugent Hopkins, is that they were not an attractive location for free agents. So they had to overpay guys to get there. So when you're overpaying guys, it's easier to get to the cap and do so without really improving the roster a whole lot. It's a tough situation. Edmonton could get better this year. It's just they're betting on a lot of guys coming up from the American League to do it, and I'm not sure where the goals come from. And goaltending, Smith's older, and Koskinen, his overall numbers, I'm trying to remember if he was 29th in save percentage or 30. Anyways, it's going to be an interesting year for them. Number 28, Detroit. I like Detroit. Don't get me wrong. But Jimmy Howard and Jonathan Bernier, I'm not sold on. I was really kind of surprised that Jimmy Howard was being courted to stick around. I thought that Detroit could use an upgrade in net. And Jimmy Howard might have benefited from a move, but the team and the player decided to stay together. Who am I to say that that's wrong? The one thing is, I do think Detroit's got some issues with this lineup. And while they're going to be fun to watch, a lot of good young kids here. And Tyler Bertuzzi is nicely transitioning towards being one of the most hated players in the league. Teams are really going to hate him. Give him another couple of years. I don't know that it'll be Tom Wilson, Brad Marchand level of hate, but it's going to be high. So Detroit at 28. Prove me wrong. 27. Minnesota tailspin. Now, you can look at this and say, well, they're going to have Dumba back, so that's going to help. And you'd be right. There are other issues I have with the Minnesota roster. I think it's great that Fenton believes they're close enough that he can add Zuccarello and he adds Hartman. You don't add those players if you don't think you're close to a playoff spot. I just think that in the West, they're going to have a hard time keeping up. And I could be wrong. Might be wrong. There's going to be a lot of people that say that I'm wrong on this one. But again, the bias from last year comes through, right? Number 26, Anaheim. It's not all dire for Anaheim. I know on July 1st, there was a lot of talk about how they weren't signing any free agents. No, it's not free agent signing time for Anaheim at all. There's a lot of good young kids to come up here. Comtois, I loved the kid when he was up with Anaheim. I was really surprised when they sent him down. I probably benefited his overall game, but I thought he was one of the more dynamic forwards they had. And that if they kept him around, I really thought he could have helped their chances. But that being said, he'll be in the lineup this year, I would think. I can't see how Comtois doesn't make it. They'll have a full year with Sam Steele as well. There's a lot of good young players here, and they could absolutely rock it up. They're a team that I look at and say, yeah, they could jump right back into the playoffs, because traditionally, they've been able to do that. And while they've lost Perry and now Kessler's out, I think Perry hurt him at points last year, and I know Kessler did. So sometimes it's easier just to rip that Band-Aid off, and it feels like that's what Anaheim did this offseason. And while Getzlaf's a year older as well, and he has trouble staying healthy for a full 82 games, they do have Gibson and net. And any Ducks fan will tell you that he deserved the Vezina, or at least some consideration for the Vezina. And you know what? Early in the year, he was the only reason they had a respectable record. So I'm not going to disagree with that. But I still have them at 26. 25, Buffalo. Yes, the blue line is better. Yes, they kept Jeff Skinner. They still have Hutton and Ullmark as their goaltenders. I'm not sold on that tandem. Hutton played really, really well at the start of the year. Ullmark, of course, had that great winning streak. He was undefeated. And then it just tailed off. And once it started to fall off, and their goaltending, which could have been praised during the solid run they had right into November, it had to take its share of the blame for what happened after that, for the collapse. I'm very surprised that we didn't see some kind of a change in their goaltending situation. Jason Botterill may very well have inquired, and the price might have been too high. If they're slow out of the gate, I would watch for a change there. I would not even be surprised to see some kind of a surprising change, and like Carolina did last year, where Scott Darling ended up being out. That was a completely different situation, but I would not be surprised to see Buffalo. If somebody interesting goes on waivers who's a goaltender, watch them. Because if they have an iffy preseason and they're not too certain about their goaltending, they might do something crazy. They have to make the playoffs this year. They have to. Their fan base is finally starting to get a little frustrated and antsy, and they should be. It's been too long. 24 is Philly. They have Carter Hart. They have a solid young blue line that they've added some veterans to, and they added Kevin Hayes down the middle. Most of us agree that Kevin Hayes is overpaid. He had his first ever 50-point season. Is he going to get that again? Who knows? Either way, I don't know that Philly's done enough to get them back into the playoffs. I know they're going to make me look foolish because Philly in the playoffs, out of the playoffs, in the playoffs, out of the playoffs. So this is supposed to be an in the playoffs season. So they'll prove me wrong. Carter Hart is the real deal, and he should be their starter this fall. That being said, I don't get the feeling that they're going to rush that either. So if Elliott's the goaltender on opening night, I don't know how surprised I'm going to be, but Carter Hart's going to push for time. I've been doing the history videos and talking about certain young goaltenders, Tom Barrasso being one, and really Carter Hart's kind of reminded me of that we didn't expect him to be here so soon, and we didn't expect him to be so darn good so soon either. So it puts the team in a good spot, really does. 23, Jersey. Yes, they added Subban. Yes, they drafted Jack Hughes. Yes, they should be a lot better. Taylor Hall should be back and should be healthy. They should be able to score, which they struggled with last season. But Corey Schneider and Mackenzie Blackwood are the goaltenders at this stage, and I'm a huge Corey Schneider fan. Everybody knows it. Dick's Sporting Goods in the States is having a sale on some jerseys, and one that was on sale for, I think it was $114 American, is the New Jersey Devils third, the retro, which I have, but it had Schneider on the back, and I was so tempted to buy it, and I kept saying, Shannon, you already have the retro jersey. You don't need it just because it's Schneider on the back. I really want a Corey Schneider jersey, whether it's Canucks or whether it's Devils. So I'm still a fan of him. I just don't know that he can get them back into the playoffs this year. And I don't know that they'd be able to find a taker for that contract either. New Jersey for me is still lacking that goaltending to get them into the playoffs. 22. Montreal doesn't have a goaltending issue, but they do have an offense issue. Bergevin trying to poach Aho means that he knows they have an issue with scoring goals. They went after Matt Duchene. Duchene, no thanks. I think they would have liked to talk to Panarin if Panarin would have talked back. Montreal is in an interesting place. They don't seem to be an attractive destination for top-notch free agents, and they desperately need at least one. They were in on Tavares. They really wanted Tavares. The feeling wasn't mutual. They really need that one big player. That being said, Poehling had an amazing game at the end of the season, and Kotkaniemi may become that guy. Jesperi Kotkaniemi may become that guy. Solid rookie season, not talked about because everybody was all over Pettersson and what Binnington did, and of course since the playoffs it's all Binnington. Kotkaniemi may become the gem from that rookie class. Absolutely. So if Montreal's going to improve, it's likely going to be from within. 21, Arizona. Yeah, they added Phil Kessel. They also relied on a career year from Darcy Kemper, and I'm not 100% convinced Kemper can follow that up. One thing when I'm looking at teams is I have to take a guy who had numbers that seem out of line with the rest of his career and say that was a great year he had. Let's see if he can follow that up. Is Ronta going to be healthy? Because if Kemper falls back to his career average, which is possible, and if Ronta's not 100%, Arizona could find themselves in some trouble out of the gate. Adding Kessel, it's going to help, 100%. I thought it was funny reading an article about how Kessel, a lot of his points weren't 5-on-5, they were on the power play, and they said he's not going to score 82 in Arizona because they don't have a good power play. And I thought, well, isn't Pittsburgh losing him off their power play going to hurt them too? You can't just, and there's some people in the media that do this, they just fill, and it's just all, he's garbage, he sucks, he's garbage. You can't just do this and say that Phil's going to get 60 points in Arizona because he had all these power play points when he was in Pittsburgh, and not say that he earned power play points in Pittsburgh. That's not how it works. And when you have him, and if Nick Schmaltz is healthy, their power play could turn things around. So I'm not on that bandwagon of Phil's going to score 60 points. I don't understand it. I don't get it. And it's just that's the way it is. He's got 2 Stanley Cup rings. He's got tremendous point totals over the last 5 years. His career average point totals solid, and yet because there's a perception he doesn't work as hard as everybody else, the media looks for ways to needle him and find fault and find flaws. Number 20, Vancouver. Yeah, they've improved. I 100% believe they've improved. Do I see them in the playoffs? I'm having a hard time. I can't put them here. I would if I thought I could. I can't. I think they're going to be better than a lot of people give them credit for. But I still don't see them making the playoffs. I think they're still, I want to say a defenseman away. Jake Gardiner in Vancouver or Montreal could make a huge difference. Those are the 2 locations I look at and I say that would make sense. And yet Vancouver doesn't have the cap space, and Montreal, I don't know that they necessarily have the interest in Gardiner, or else I think he would have been signed already. We're up to July 14th. Gardiner's still a free agent. So Vancouver's made some improvements. I think Miller's going to help. Ferland's going to help. Myers is going to help. And they didn't trade anything to get these guys. I think the Eriksson contract, if that's still on their books come October, they're not over the cap because they Roussel is out until December. But the Eriksson thing has to be over. It has to go. That has to be done. That part of Canucks history has to be over, and then we move on. But as I don't know, I still look at Vancouver and say they're going to be better. It's going to be a fun year. I want this to be wrong, but I still have some concerns. Number 19, Rangers, and this is where we're from 19 up. We're into teams that I think could make the playoffs. Yeah, there's some prejudice that's probably keeping teams in the top 16 that shouldn't be. That realistically aren't going to follow up what they did last year with another playoff season. Just it's easy to be prejudiced based on last year's results. And you look at the predictions for this year's regular season and how the channel and myself voted on all that, and it just, everybody was wrong. So I don't expect us to be right this year either, and the Rangers could prove us wrong. My concern with the Rangers is Lundqvist. Lundqvist looked ordinary this year, and by his standards, he was below them. He was below his normal career standards, and that happens as you get older. And the bounce back years become more and more difficult as you get older as well. He could have one, which means that if he doesn't, then you've got Georgiev and Shesterkin. Shesterkin's likely going to take a little while to get used to the game on this side of the pond. So there's still some unknowns with the Rangers. Adding Trouba, I think, helps. Adding Panarin's a huge addition. But I still look at the overall roster, and I did that video on the Rangers lineup, and I think there's still a move to be made. After that move gets made, they very well may end up in the top 16. But I think there's still a move to be made there to improve things. Both down the middle, and I think maybe something switched out on the blue line. We'll see. Number 18, Columbus. No, losing Panarin didn't drop them to 18. Nope. Picking up Nyquist means they lose about 20 points. And if you believe in Moneyball, and you believe in Money Puck, which is something that Mike Gillis tried to do in Vancouver, and it's along that same idea of, okay, well, this guy won't score me 40, but he'll score me 15, and that guy will score me 20, so we're only losing 5 goals. And ideas like that, I know I'm oversimplifying it, but it's that same idea. So if you look at it that way, going from Panarin to Nyquist, you're losing about 20 points. In the overall scheme of things, it's probably 10 less goals. But if a guy like Texier comes up and plays really, really well, if Bjorkstrand takes that next step, Columbus's offense could be just as good. And their defense is fantastic. I have them here because I'm not sold on Korpisalo. I'm not. And until I see Elvis in the building, playing games, I can't say for sure how he's going to be at the NHL level. Goaltenders from Europe, it's a really tricky thing. Some of them come in, pick it up right away and they're great, and some of them just don't. I could go through and make videos on goalies who come over and players in general who come over from Europe, and the good, the bad, and the ugly of that. But until I see it, it's hard for me to project Columbus going back to the playoffs. Number 17, Chicago. It was a really up and down year for Chicago, and the divorce with Quenneville was kind of sloppy, to be honest. Because I think they wanted to do it at the end of the 2017-2018 season, and then they kind of chickened out. And then when 2018-2019 wasn't going the way they wanted it to, then they got rid of him. I think they would have been better off if they had done it during the offseason last summer. But either way, they're where they're at now, and I like the team. I think there's, and when I say like the team, I mean I like their chances. I think the bounce back is for real, and I think the Central is really wide open this year. I think the Central's the most wide open this year it's ever been. You could make an argument that Minnesota could finish in the top 3 in the division. Might be a tough argument to make, but you could make it. And for Chicago, I think there's going to be a bounce back year. Kane had an amazing year. Taves had a bounce back year this past season. Saad had an up and down year, but by the end, he was right around career averages. And so the additions they've made on the blue line, adding Leonard and net, they might get back. Number 16, Penguins. Well, this is going to be one of the sexy picks to fall out of the playoffs. And I'm there, but you got Matt Murray in net. You got Letang on the blue line. You've got Crosby and Malkin down the middle. It is hard to project a team that's got those building blocks, those pieces, falling out of the playoffs. Could happen. 110% could happen. But it's... While I have them on the precipice of falling out, I don't know that it happens. I think they've still got a solid nucleus. I think there's enough to work with there. I didn't mention Jake Gensel, did I? You could score 40, you could score 50 on that wing. So, Pittsburgh, while I think their best days are probably behind them, and I'm talking about like the Crosby, Malkin, Golden era of this team, I don't think that we should be writing them off just yet. Number 15. Yeah, Carolina. And they'd be higher if they'd kept McElhinney. Now, I get why they moved on from McElhinney. I do. McElhinney at his age, and he had a career year. I mentioned in other teams, career years are dangerous, especially if it's an older player. They get Reimer, who, I don't know. For me, Reimer's, I like Reimer, but while I like him, I don't know that I trust him to be a starter. And with Mrazek I think benefited from the fact that he split the net with McElhinney. And I don't know that they're going to be able to do that this coming season. If it's going to be Mrazek and Reimer, I'm not sure they can do that again. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Carolina. Their goaltending may change during the year. I could see it changing during the season. If Reimer gets off to a slow start, look out. We may find ourselves in a situation where he's getting moved on from again. But getting ahead of myself, I still have them in the playoffs. Just I'm skeptical about it being as smooth as it was this year in the second half. 14 is Nashville. I'm going to be honest, when I started this out, I had Nashville at around 18th. I did. But they added Duchesne. They've done some stuff over the last little while. I'm still concerned that Rene, another year older, right? There were definitely some cracks in his game against Dallas in the playoffs. It's getting harder and harder to ignore that now because he is getting older. Is Saros going to be the guy? Because the idea is that they're just seamlessly going to go to Saros. I don't know how seamless that's going to be. So for me, I still have them probably in the playoffs, yeah. But this is where we're into kind of that probably range. So really, in all honesty, it's going to be kind of fluid. Like I said, I've been going back and forth on this a lot. Adding Duchesne should really help, though. And apparently they're keeping Turris as well. They believe Turris can have a bounce-back year as the number 3 center. Number 13 is Winnipeg. They lost Myers. They lost Sherratt. They lost Tanev. There's a bleeding off of depth there. Winnipeg, a very strong, very deep team. They sacrificed Lemieux to rent Hayes. Hayes, of course, didn't stick around, so Lemieux's gone. Rangers are going to love him. And for me with Winnipeg, I feel like maybe their best chance has passed. They were the sexy pick to win the Stanley Cup in 2019 before the season started. By the time the playoffs rolled around, most had gone off of that. I had gone off of that. I didn't see it. And I don't see anything that's happened in the offseason that tells me, okay, these guys are going to have a big resurgence. At the point where I'm taping this, of course, Connor, Line A are still out there as restricteds. I'm assuming that they stay. I'm assuming they stay in Winnipeg and there's no offer sheets coming in. But in all honesty, Winnipeg makes me nervous. I could see them falling down the barrel. Right. I could see them missing the playoffs. 110%. Absolutely. And it's going to be a really interesting year for them because it could be one or the other, right? Washington, before the 2017-2018 season, looked like they were in a position where they were finally out of the race as a contender. And then they won the Stanley Cup. So, strange things happen. Number 12, Dallas. I'm not as convinced as everybody else that Dallas is suddenly... That's it. They're good. They're in. They're contender. There you go. They added Pavelski and they added Perry. Perfect. Now they're a contender. I'm not on that bandwagon, and I'm going to say why. Pavelski had a great year for San Jose. Pavelski spent his entire career in San Jose. That doesn't necessarily mean he scores 35-plus goals for the Dallas Stars. There's usually a transition period where a guy's learning the new system and a new team for the first time. And I don't necessarily think it's a slam dunk that Dallas is going to be this tremendous contender this year. And when I see things like, well, they've got the best tandem in the league, and I'm going, you could argue they have the best tandem in the league. I did a video last year on best tandems in the NHL, and I'll do it again this summer. But I don't know. I don't know that I have Dallas as number one. I don't know that I do. And I don't know that I can see it happening anytime soon. That's, again, Jamie Benn had a down year by his standards. Heiskanen's going to get better. That blue line's going to be pretty smacktastic. But I still have my concerns. Number 11, Calgary. It's not as much that they lost anything, although Talbot and Riddick. It's just that the way Calgary went out in the playoffs, and then you look at the moves made in the offseason, and I'm pretty sure Calgary doesn't finish number one in the entire West again. They had a fantastic regular season run. The playoffs showed they have some work to do, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure that Giordano can follow up the season he just had with another one like that. I still think they're in the playoffs, but I do think they fall back, which might benefit them. Again, some teams I think play better as underdogs, and Calgary has traditionally been one of those teams. Number 10, I did not drop the Florida Magnet on the floor. Nope, it actually was in the pile, and they're number 10. You had Joel Quenneville behind the bench. You had Sergei Bobrovsky in net. You've got arguably the best coach of the last, I'll say, 10 years in the NHL. And you had a goaltender who's arguably, when you look at the stats over the last 5 years, the best goaltender over the last 5 years in the National Hockey League. Goaltending is why Florida missed the playoffs. Defense was part of it as well. They added Anton Strawman to try to prop things up there. Man, I really like Florida's chances this year. And I had said last year, remember I said I'm off Florida's bandwagon, I'm not going to bet on them again? Damn it, I'm here again. I'm betting on them again. If they fail again, that's it. And the thing too is, I'm saying they're going to go up like this after Luongo's retirement. So it shows that there's no Luongo bias in it this year, as I may have had some of that last year. But Florida, I think, has done it. Their scoring's fantastic. Their leadership is solid. Everything is there. Now they've got the goalie. Now they've got the coach. Go get it. Number 9, Islanders. Losing Leonard, going to Varlamov may not end up being the huge drop that a lot of people expect. Varlamov's numbers have been middling in Colorado the last couple of seasons. But that being said, he could absolutely bounce back with the Islanders. They worked magic with Leonard. They worked magic with him. And as long as Greiss is able to have another season like the one that he just had, You've got a solid 1-2 punch there. They did not lose Anders Lee, which I think was huge for the team. For the teams they didn't, for the fans. You don't want to see your captain walk out 2 years in a row. So the fact the Islanders captain stuck around, congratulations to them. That's good news. Number 8, Sharks. It hurts losing Pavelski. 110%. It hurts. They have not yet signed Thornton or Marlowe. I assume both of them are going to end up being Sharks this coming year. I think Wilson has probably talked to them, and I'll get you guys signed. I just got some other stuff to do first. Keeping Erik Karlsson means they're still going to be a playoff team. I have some concerns with Martin Jones. Martin Jones had a miserable season. If Jones has another miserable season and they don't have those 35-plus goals from Pavelski, they absolutely could dive down to the middle of the pack and be in a position where they could potentially miss the playoffs. But I like Jones's chances for a bounce back. He had a good run in the playoffs after they got past Vegas. I have Vegas at 7. They're just ahead of the Sharks. I expect that to be a pretty good rivalry this year. For some reason, I think that these teams just don't like each other. I get the impression that the fan bases probably don't like each other either. So I have Vegas at 7. I still have some concerns with their blue line. They had to shed a few players to get under the cap, which was expected. They still haven't got a deal with Gusev, and whether they sign Gusev or they trade Gusev, that'll go a long way to deciding how good they are. If they could turn Gusev into a blue liner, and I don't mean like transition him to playing on the defense. I mean if they could trade him and get somebody on the blue line back, I think that could help. But either way, Vegas, to me, while they're solid and they're going to be up here, my concern with them too is that Fleury's getting older, and at some point his play is going to start to drop, and you're going to need to at least give him more nights off. If Subban's the backup, is Gallant going to give Fleury more nights off? Subban needs to work, and Fleury needs to rest. Those things have to happen this year, or they're not going to finish that high. Number 6. It is a really good time to be an Avalanche fan. Colorado looks fantastic. They really do. They got to the second round. They look better than Calgary. Once they got their game in gear, Calgary couldn't keep up with them. Grubauer emerged as a solid playoff goaltender. Should be their starter this year. It really shouldn't be a big problem for them. That's the one question mark I have is kind of can Grubauer do it over a full season? But other than that, pretty solid team. And adding Byram in the draft, thanks Ottawa, right? As soon as you see Byram out there, you guys need to start thinking Ottawa. And really, in all honesty, I've got the Colorado / Quebec history video ready to put together, and that trade for Duchesne, just every time I look at it, it looks better and better for Colorado. It is the trade that I believe saved Joe Sakic from having to worry about his job, probably ever. So Colorado, they look solid. Number 5, I go back and forth on Boston. Because, Rask had a really good year, and in the playoffs, he was fantastic. And Bergeron, that whole line, don't call it the perfection line. Stop it. They really, really played very, very well. And McAvoy's coming into his own. He had a bit of an up and down year, but by the end of the year, he was pretty good. I like Boston. I don't know. I could see them falling back a little bit. Not being able to keep Johansson, I think that hurts. Johansson was solid for them in the playoffs. And at some point in time, a lot of these guys are getting older. I think Marchand had a career year with 100 points. I think he probably falls down to about 90. And so we'll see how things turn out. Pasternak may very well be the guy that decides whether or not Boston is one of the top 5 or they end up down in this area. For me, I've got him at 5. I don't have him higher. 4 is Toronto. So the Maple Leafs, who I know it's everybody's favorite thing in the world to bash them. The fact is, to me anyways, these guys pushed Boston to 7 this year and last year. Last year, I really thought they were going to beat Boston in 7. This year, I had a good feeling about Boston going into Game 7. That being said, they're due. They're due. They have all the pieces they need. And adding Tyson Barrie, and we can debate about whether he's worth $8 million, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Honestly, and I say that because he's likely a rental. This is likely a very, very expensive rental by the Toronto Maple Leafs. And they're banking on him being able to bring some help to that power play that desperately needed it. They needed to fix their power play, and they needed more offense from the blue line, and he does that for them. Yeah, defensively, he might be a misadventure 5-on-5. I don't think they're overly worried about that. And I still think Toronto is in that conversation. I think they're going to be one of the top teams this year. This is the one that could hurt me. Remember, last summer I said they were going to win the President's Trophy. So, yeah. Number 3, Caps. It's easy to forget the Capitals because they got knocked out in the first round. They won the Cup in 2018, right? I think there's a case to be made that this coming season, after having a nice full summer off, I always wonder when a team is trying to repeat as Stanley Cup champions, just how tired are they once the playoffs roll around? They played until June the previous year. They didn't have anywhere near the amount of an offseason they normally do. So extra bumps and bruises and just being exhausted from the year before. Now that Washington has tasted defeat again in the playoffs, I think that gives them a little extra fire. And with Backstrom and Holtby both having expiring contracts this year, I think that gives a little bit of extra impetus to make it work this year, whether you're the general manager, the coach, or the players on the bench. This might be their best chance. After this year, it might be a little more difficult due to cap reasons. We don't know what's going to happen next year, though, because the whole CBA thing being up and lockout discussions and all that stuff. But for now, I would say the Caps should go for it this year. And number 2, the defending Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues, which means at number 1, I have Tampa. I'm going to explain this. So St. Louis to me gets 2 because they've kept everything together for that Stanley Cup final, Stanley Cup winning run. They look great. Tampa looked miserable in that first round against Columbus. Tampa got swept in the first round against Columbus. And it's really easy to overlook the 62 wins. It is really easy to overlook the awards show that we just watched and how Tampa took home a whole bunch of awards. I would not put it past them to do it again. And I would not put it past them to this time emerge victorious. I could have dropped them way down here. I could have had St. Louis up at 1. But honestly, Tampa underachieved greatly in the playoffs. They've got to have some fire. And still, when I look at their roster, to me, they still have the most talented roster in the league. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, just tapping upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.